40. That's to help me remember where I'm at this morning. Acts 19:20. I better know where I'm at this morning, right? Anyway, we've been going through the book of Acts, and we are going to be starting at Acts 19:21 this morning. We are also going to spend a good bit of time in the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah 44. So if you have a Bible, you could kind of put one finger over there. But, we're going to pick up today. If you remember last week, Paul's been in Ephesus, and there were some people who came to believe that were so trusting in Jesus and so wanted to get away from their formal sinful lifestyle that they actually took the magic books that they had. These people were into sorcery and magic, and they took these magic books and they burned them, and it said that the value of them at that time was like 50,000 pieces of silver, which is just an immense amount of money. To me, it's like a lotto-size demonstration of faith. It'd be almost like if you won the lotto and you tore up the ticket and said, "No, I'm going to trust God." That's the kind of sacrifice these people made. So that's pretty impressive. But today we're going to witness the response of some people who weren't real happy with the gospel, who didn't trust in Jesus and actually saw it as a threat to their livelihood, and it exposed their idolatry. And that's what we're going to see as we pick up here at Acts 19:21. So let me start reading here. It says, "When these things were accomplished, Paul purposed in the Spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, 'After I've been there, I must also see Rome.' Then he sent into Macedonia two of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, but he himself stayed in Asia for a while." So, Paul's talking about what he's going to be doing soon, and it says he purposed in the Spirit. Really, probably what that means is his desire, his leading of the Spirit was to minister to people in the gospel, and what made sense to him at the moment was to go back and visit some of the churches he had planted in Macedonia, which would be like Philippi, Thessalonica again. No! I have so much trouble with that word. Speech therapy didn't quite cure me of not being able to say Thessalonica, right? So he's going to go and he's going to visit Philippi, Thessalonica, and Corinth, and some of the other places he had visited. But he's not going to go yet. He's staying in Ephesus for the moment. But he sends Timothy and Erastus in ahead. And a few other places in the Scriptures, 2 Corinthians 9 would be an example of where it talks about a collection being taken up for the poor saints in Jerusalem. And this is probably what he sends them ahead to do. Part of that is to start making that collection. So when Paul does get to Jerusalem, he'll have money available that churches have donated, people have donated to help those people. So that's kind of a neat thing he does. And it's interesting that it mentions Timothy and Erastus are ministering to Paul. And probably this errand he sends them on is one way. But again, it's just, so Paul can spend his time preaching and teaching. And we know he does some tent making to help support himself. But he's got other people around that do other things that help him, or enable him to focus on what he's really called to do, which is primarily teaching and preaching. Interesting, it says Paul's long-term goal, he says, "I must go to Rome also." And he's saying here, well, why does these other places he say he's going to go, but he says he must go to Rome? And it could be, back in Acts 9:15, Jesus had said, "Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel." And if Paul was going to bear Jesus' name before kings, really, at the time, the place to do that would have been in Rome, right? That's where he's going to find the true Roman leaders. So for the moment, he stays in Ephesus. I'm going to pick back up here at verse 23. This is while Paul's still back in Ephesus. It says, "About that time there arose a great commotion about the way." We talked about last week, the way is just, Christians, the gospel, following Jesus is the way. It says, "For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen." And this is interesting. Differences in religious beliefs are seldom the sole reason for persecution, right? We hear about persecution going on around the world, and persecution's been going on throughout history. Seldom is it just about religious differences. Usually, if you dig a little deeper, it'll be about power or money and some other things that are going on. And in this case, it's not really even concealed the fact that this guy Demetrius, who's raising this stink here, he has financial concerns, right? He's afraid that Paul's hurting his bottom line of his business in making idols. And, these idols that they made, there was a temple in Ephesus, a temple of Diana, which was really at the time kind of world-renowned, at least the known world to them. It was world-renowned. It was a tourist destination. People worshiped there. It was like one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was amazing. So they would make these idols, and people who worshiped Diana, these idols of either her or the temple, people would buy them and put them in their home, or tourists would even come and buy them just as a keepsake. Hey, I went to Ephesus and I saw that great temple. Look at this. So these guys are making a pretty good living. And we could be critical of Demetrius. It'd be easy to say, hey, how can this guy put his financial gain above Jesus? How could he do that? We could be critical of him, right? But it's interesting. The Bible warns that all of us, believers and unbelievers, all of us are susceptible to making an idol of money. It says in 1 Timothy 6:10, it says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." So we know money can be used for good purposes, right? Money, God gives us the means to make money and allows us to have money so that we can meet our needs, also so we can use it to help others, right? And money can certainly buy a lot of pleasurable things and experiences, right? But money can also start to see it as your source of security. Right? You might start to think of money, well, this money is going to give me some power in my life. It's going to give me some hope for the future. And guess what? All of a sudden, it starts to become an idol. It's easy to start loving money because you think, well, the more I have of it, the more secure I am. What if you woke up one morning and it wasn't worth anything anymore? It was just paper and pieces of metal. You wouldn't have any security at all, right? So the Bible warns us about making an idol of those things, right? Starting to put our hope in those things. And the truth is, any of us, because it's kind of our nature, our sin nature, even as Christians, we can start to forget about how well God provides for us and start looking for hope and help and security in other things. We may not bow down to little idols like they did, but we may be idolaters at times just the same. So we'll find what Demetrius does here is, even though it's clearly a financial matter, he will try to make it look like religious outrage at points. And here at 25, it picks up what he does. He calls together the other workers of similar occupation, and he said, men, we have our prosperity in this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with our hands. This always just blows my mind, right? That if you could call something a god and then act like you have to defend this God, or that God's in trouble, right? If you have to defend your God to keep other people from hurting your God, what kind of God is that? Right? I mean, what kind of God is it that needs mankind to come to his defense? That doesn't even make sense. So we're going to spend a little bit of time in Isaiah 44, and I know this is a bit of a sidetrack, and I'm going to read quite a bit of the chapter, but it's a great kind of exposing of what idols are and what they're not. It's even a little bit sarcastic at times. You ever think there's a little sarcasm in the Bible? At points, there is a little sarcasm in the Bible. And I would say God really points fun at idols. And he can do that, right? Because he's God and they're not. So God kind of points fun at idols. So I'm going to pick up here at Isaiah 44, verse 6. I would also say that this is even a little bit prophetic of what we see going on with Paul in Ephesus. In other words, we could read this in Isaiah from 600-700 years earlier and look at what's going on in Ephesus and say, boy, this is like predicting exactly what's going on there. But let me start here at Isaiah 44:6. It says, "Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first and I am the last. Beside me there is no God. And who can proclaim as I do? Then let him declare it and set an order for me, since I appointed the ancient people. And the things that are coming and shall come, let them do these. Do not fear nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time and declared it? You are my witnesses. Is there a God beside me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one." So the one true God, what God is saying, he's all powerful, right? He's all powerful. I mean, he's more powerful than anybody. And he proclaims the end from the beginning. I mean, what is the Bible? The Bible is God proclaiming the end from the beginning, right? It's the story of redemption through Jesus and then our eternity with him, starting from Genesis and right on through. So God tells the end from the beginning. And if we trust him, we have nothing to fear, right? If we come to know him as the true God and he's all powerful, he loves us, we have nothing to fear. By contrast, look what he says about these idols and those who make them. In verse 9 it says, "Those who make an image, all of them are useless, and their precious things shall not profit. They are their own witnesses. They neither see nor know, that they may be ashamed. Who would form a god or mold an image that profits him nothing?" right? And what profit are idols? Well, only to the one who makes them and sells them. Other than that, they're of no use. What God's saying is they're blind. They can't see. They can't tell you what's going to happen down the road. They can't help you or meet your needs. The idols are completely worthless for any kind of spiritual guidance or help. It goes on, verse 11. Surely all his companions would be ashamed, and the workmen, they are mere men. Let them all be gathered together. Let them stand up. Yet they shall fear. They shall be ashamed together. And this is where I said it's a little bit prophetic, because what do we see going on in Ephesians? The craftsmen who make the idols, they're banding together and they're standing up and saying, hey, we need to stop this guy Paul. He's attacking our religion. He's ruining our idols. And they're afraid because their God is under attack. Well, what kind of God is it when you're afraid when people attack your God? That doesn't even make sense. It goes on, verse 12. The blacksmith with the tongs works one with coals, fashions it with hammers, and works it with the strength of his arms. Even so, he is hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. Oh my goodness, imagine this. Imagine a man, or a woman for that matter, making a god and wearing themselves out making a god. It's like, oh man, I've been making a god all day and I'm just exhausted. Oh, phew. Man, it's killing me. God made all of us. He made everything. He did it in 6 days, and then he rested, not because he was tired, but because he was done. Right? He was done. So it's crazy, right? That people would wear themselves. Right? Jesus said, come to me, all you are weary and heavy laden, right? And you'll find rest for your souls. Right? Idols will wear us out. Idols want us to sacrifice and wear ourselves out. We come to Jesus and we find rest. Because we can trust him. We can trust him. It goes on. The craftsman stretches out his rule. He marks one out with chalk. He fashions it with a plane. He marks it out with the compass. And he makes it like the figure of man, according to the beauty of the man, and it may remain in his house. And again, might make it according to the beauty of a man or a woman. But man-made gods are always made in our image. Right? If man makes a god in his image. All the other religions of the world outside of the truth of Jesus Christ, they reflect man in some sense. In other words, the God they worship will be either literally like a little idol that looks like man, or figuratively it'll have the characteristics of man. Right? It'll be a God who is either indulgent or weak or needy, right, or selfish. But that's not how the true God is, right? Those are what the gods are like that we make. Again, they're gods that are always going to be demanding a sacrifice. Well, the true God doesn't need anything from us, right? Goes on, it says in verse 14, he cuts down cedars for himself. He takes the cypress and the oak. He secures it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a pine, and the rain nourishes it. Then it shall be for a man to burn, for he will take some of it and warm himself. Yes, he kindles it and bakes bread. Indeed, he makes a god and worships it. He makes it a carved image and falls down to it. Where does the idol maker get his materials? I mean, if the idol maker is going to make a wooden idol, where did he get the materials? From the trees. Who made the trees? God. Who watered the trees? God. Right? Who fertilized? God does all of that, right? And it's so crazy, right, that somebody would take that, right? And God gave those trees, in this case, for good purposes, right? So they can warm themselves, so they can make food, right? And ideally, what you ought to do is be satisfied. God, thank you for the tree. You're so graceful. You're such a good provider for us. We thank you so much. But instead of worshiping and thanking God for the tree and the good purposes, they twist it right into something profane, right? Into something it's an idol. Well, you do that when you're not thankful, right? You start looking to other things for help and hope when you're not thankful for what God has given you, right? So this idol maker, rather than recognizing God's mercy in the tree for fire and cooking and warmth, he makes an idol and bows down to it. Seems completely crazy. Goes on, verse 16, he burns half of it in the fire. With this half he eats meat, and he roasts the roast, and he is satisfied. He even warms himself and says, I am warm, I have seen the fire. And the rest of it he makes into a god, his carved image. He falls down before it and worships it. He prays to it and says, deliver me, for you are my God. Now, how silly would this look? If I took out my wallet, which has about $7 in it, but it's got a few credit cards. If I took out my wallet and I bowed down and I said, oh, money, please, be my hope and my future. Save me, money, save me. You'd think I'd lost my mind, right? Do you think I've lost my mind? Sure you would. Here's the thing, though. If that's the way we worshipped our idols today, it would be pretty obvious, right? It'd be pretty. But, worship is not about body position. It's about our heart. Right? Idolatry is in the heart. I don't have to be on my knees bowing to something for me to be making an idol of it. Right? I could make an idol of something and you don't even see it. Right? Because what it is, it's about what's in here and what am I trusting in, right? What am I looking to for hope? Goes on, verse 18. They do not know nor understand, it's talking about the idols, for he has shut their eyes. It turns to God has shut their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot understand. And no one considers in his heart, nor is there knowledge nor understanding to say, I have burned half of it in the fire. Yes, I have also baked bread on its coals. I have roasted meat and eaten it. And shall I make the rest into an abomination? Shall I fall down before a block of wood? He feeds on ashes. A deceived heart has turned him aside, and he cannot deliver his soul, nor say, is there not a lie in my right hand? So what it's saying is the spiritual blindness that back here in Isaiah's time, or at the time of Paul, when Paul's dealing with these idolaters in Ephesus, or even with us today, the fall, when Adam and Eve fell, we became spiritually blind and we became natural idolaters. And until the Holy Spirit opens our eyes, changes our hearts, we don't see it. Right? We don't understand idolatry. We don't get the fact that there's a God who will meet all of our needs if we put faith in him. And we tend to put our faith in other things. So what that means is, but for the grace of God go we, right? In other words, we can't beat up on Demetrius, this silversmith idolater, too much, because if not for Jesus, if not for his Spirit working in us, we'd be idolaters too. Not in the same way. I don't think any of you have little silver idols of Diana back here in your room, sitting on your bedside table, or little. But you know what? We can put our faith and hope in other things, right? In people, in money, in jobs, in the government. Right, instead of the true God. That's just how we are. So we need to be thankful if God has shown us the truth. Now, we're done with Isaiah for now, okay? Whew. But that's pretty amazing, isn't it? To see what God says about idols. It really does bring some things out. But verse 27, back in Acts, but in Ephesus, says, this is Demetrius again talking about why they need to get rid of Paul. He says, so not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised, and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Again, this is just so crazy. If she's God, how can man destroy her magnificence? Right? If you were God, how can mankind pull you down and make you less than? You know what? Our God, the true God, the God who gave us his word, the one who sent Jesus to die for our sins, his magnificence is completely separate from us, right? It's self-contained in who he is, right? In other words, God did not need us. He didn't have to create us to serve him, to make him, to protect him, to do anything for him, right? He created us so we could come to know him and worship him, right? And so that he could display his attributes to us. And again, he does this in love, right? God was always loving and graceful and merciful and holy and just. But in the redemption plan, and what Jesus did on the cross, he displays those attributes, right? For us to see and for the universe to see, really. So, again, very different between the true God and false gods. The true God doesn't need anybody or anything to make him who he is or to make him more, because he is everything already. Right, he's everything already, which is good news because that's why we can trust him. It goes on. Now, when they heard this, as verse 28, they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's traveling companions. So it starts with this one man, Demetrius' objection to the gospel for financial reasons. Now it's on the verge of an all-out riot, and they've seized a couple of Paul's companions. It goes on in verse 30, and when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent and pleaded with him not to venture into the theater. So those who care about Paul don't want him to go. Right? It's too dangerous. And let me ask you, when people get into this state, when people are so angry, they're screaming, we hate you, are you going to make any headway? Are you going to have a dialogue with people and try to state your case once they're already in like the riots? No, you're not going to go on. So it's wise of Paul's disciples, because, Paul, it's not that Paul's so brave, but Paul trusts God. Right? So Paul would have gone and just, I'm going to go and try to make my case. But the disciples, in this case, I think they do what's wise and they stop him from going. But it goes on, verse 32, the chaos continues with or without Paul. It says, some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they found out he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So this could be the Alexander, the coppersmith, who's mentioned later in Paul's letter to Timothy, both his letters to Timothy, who's really called an enemy of the faith. We're not sure about that. But have you ever hear like on the news these days, these crazy phrases like controlling the narrative? You ever hear about things like that? We're trying to control the narrative. That's what they do like in politics and in the news, That's what's going on here. Because the Jews, they don't like Paul either. Now, some do. Some come to believe in Jesus and follow him. But the rest of them, especially the leaders, typically don't like Paul. They don't like the Christians. They see him as a threat to their way of life too. So what they're trying to do here is they're trying to have Alexander go forward, and being a Jew, he can kind of frame this thing so that, number one, they don't associate the Jews with the Christians. In other words, he doesn't want this mob to make the mistake of saying, hey, Paul says he preaches the Jewish Messiah, so we're going to get them too. So he wants to control that narrative. He wants to make sure it's understood. Hey, look, we're no friends of the Christians. We're us, they're them. And at the same time, he could use it as an opportunity to kind of pile on, right? Maybe stir them up even worse against Paul and, right, serve a double purpose. Well, what's interesting is they're not buying it, right? Why don't they respond to, when Alexander gets up there and like, oh, let me speak. They're like, no, we don't want to hear from you. You're a Jew, and you know what? You don't buy idols either, right? In other words, he's no friend to them. The Jewish leaders may not like Paul and the Christians, but they're no friends really to the idolaters either. In other words, they would tend to speak against them, and they don't take part in their trade. They're not buying idols. So they basically run this Alexander off pretty darn quick. And then they shout worship to Diana for 2 hours, right? And again, I don't know that this is so much true worship as it is just mob mentality and, hey, we're all here. We're getting ready to persecute some guy, and we're excited, and probably like a crazy wild sporting event, really. But it goes on to verse 5. It says, when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is the temple guardian of the great goddess Diana and of the image which fell down from Zeus?" And again, it's kind of funny that you'd have to be the guardian of this god, but the temple of Diana was really magnificent and famous, so everybody would have known about it. But he warns them that basically Diana's not really in any danger, or her temple's not really in any danger, but you people are, right? He's saying, you people that are causing this ruckus, you might be in danger. And he goes on, "Therefore, since these things can't be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers nor temples, nor neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess. Therefore, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls, let them bring charges against one another." So are they going to bring charges in the courts? Well, of course not, right? Because they really don't have a case. And typically, this is how persecution works. Most of the time, persecution doesn't go through official channels. It uses mob mentality and emotions and fear, right? In this case, God's using this clerk to kind of turn the tide. Goes on to verse 39. It says, "If you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful assembly. For we are in danger of being called in question today for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give account for this disorderly gathering." And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. So basically, the Romans don't allow mobs to come together and make a scene, right? The Romans are all about order, right? And they'll stamp down any kind of, rebellion that they see going on. And the clerk's warning them, look, if we don't stop this, we're going to have to give an account to someone above me for what we were doing here today, and we don't have a good answer. So in other words, if we don't stop this and go home, it's not Paul and those guys that are going to get in trouble. It's us who are going to get in trouble. So again, it's interesting, isn't it, that who solved this problem? This clerk, he's not a Christian. There's no reason to think he is. It's just God's way, right? God uses sometimes miraculous means, sometimes ordinary means to bring about his will. Right, in this case, he delivers Paul and the other Christians from this attack. Doesn't mean idolatry's over, doesn't mean persecution's over. For the moment, what a great display of the fact that the idols have no power. Right? I mean, this was almost like one god against another. Hey, here's our statues of Diana and her temple, and this is a god Diana against your god Jesus. Let's see who wins. What was no contest, right? It was no contest. They had all the power. They had all the resources. Paul didn't even have to open his mouth. God defeated them with, you know what I mean? Just, isn't that amazing, right? It says in the scriptures, blessed are the meek, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. You know why the meek get the earth? Because they're not battling everybody and everything, right? In other words, when you're meek, you trust God, and you can enjoy the things of earth, right? You can enjoy the things God's given you because you trust Him. He's the one who gave it. He gives, He can take away. And you know no one's going to take it from you unless God allows, right? So you can have that meek and gentle spirit and just trust the Lord. And you actually get to enjoy the earth now. And of course, as a believer, you inherit the earth later, the new heavens, the new earth. But very interesting that, again, idols have no power. How do you know if you have an idol in your life? You think any of us ever struggle with idols? I mean, again, not the little statues, but you think we ever make an idol of our health, another person, a relationship, money, the stock market, the government, politics? Maybe even a place like this. Maybe sometimes, you could make an idol of the person who's giving you care. And I hear really good things about the care, but maybe you had somebody you didn't think the care was that great, and you start thinking, boy, I'm doomed if this person doesn't change. Well, is that true? Well, I'm doomed if this political group gets in power. Well, is that true? I'm doomed if I have this health problem. Well, is that true? I'm doomed if I lose this job. Well, is that true? Those are all created things. Those are all created things. You know how we'll know if it's an idol? Is we will find ourselves sinning to get it or keep it. And that's how we know it's an idol, right? As soon as you threaten my idol, and again, I may not know it's an idol, but I'll see that it's an idol by the fact that I start sinning against you to get it or to keep it. Right? In other words, I'll put protecting that above loving you. Right? I'll put keeping that thing that I'm trusting in above doing what's right and fair to you. So that's how we'll see our idols sometimes. When you get really worked up sometimes, and you're really angry or really scared or really whatever's going on, real strong emotions, sometimes you need to look a little deeper and say, what am I trusting in here? What am I trusting in? Am I trusting in God who's all-powerful, who loved me enough to have His own Son, Jesus, die on the cross to redeem me? I mean, that's a God I can trust. I can trust Him. And if I'm really trusting in Him, why am I getting worked up again? It doesn't mean other things aren't important, but if I'm getting really worked up, I'm getting really anxious, I've got this real tensity in my life, maybe there's an idol there, and I need to expose it. And God has given us a couple of things to help us from developing our idolatry or struggling with idolatry. Here's a couple of things we can do. One is spend time in His Word. Because guess what? You can read like what we did this morning, and you might just be reading the Word and realize you've been making an idol of something. So we spend time in His Word. That's going to help us not trust in idols or people or money or jobs or our talents or the politics, any of that. It'll help us be remembered who's got the power, and that's God. So we spend time in His Word. Certainly spend time in prayer. Right? Prayer is great because I can just say, God, you know what? Here's what I think I need, and let me trust you. And guess what? If you need it, He can give it to you. And if He doesn't give it to you, what does it mean? Well, you must not have needed it right now. You must not have needed it. This is an amazing thing about God. He always knows exactly what's right and best for us right now. Right? And that may not be what's right and best for us right now. It might be best for us later. It might be better for us never. Or maybe He's got some totally different plan. So if I pray, I can say, God, you know what? Here's what I think I need or want, but let me trust you. Spend time around other believers. It's another good way to battle idolatry, right? Because someone else might care enough about you to point something out and say, hey, what are you trusting in here? Are you trusting in God or are you trusting in that? And again, if I'm a believer, I don't mind someone pointing that out to me lovingly, gracefully, because I want to be free. You know what I think is maybe the best way to avoid idols? And I can say this as someone who struggles, right, at times with putting hope in other things. The best way to avoid idols, idolatry, putting hope in things besides God is constantly thanking God for what He's already given us, right? In other words, if you're always thankful for what God's given you, Satan, idols, these other things, they have no power. Because what are they going to offer you? Right? And the money comes along and says, oh, trust in me. And if you have to, cheat them or hurt them or do this or do that. You say, why, money? I've got all I need. And God's the one who gives it to me. Why should I cheat or lie or steal when God's gracefully given me what's best and right all the time? Doesn't mean I wouldn't maybe like to have more, but you know what? I need to trust Him more than even trust myself. So, right, if we're thankful, God, thank you for the job I have. Thank you for the wife I have. Thank you for the house I have. Thank you for my health that I have. Could my health be better? Yeah, it could be a whole lot worse too. Right? So the more thankful I am, the less idolatrous I am. Does that make sense? It's true. We all need to be reminded of that because, again, we worship a God we can't see. but we're surrounded by things that we can see that want us to worship them, right? And the devil would love for us to worship anything, even a good thing, right, put in the wrong place, put in a position of putting our hope and trust in it. All of a sudden, a good thing becomes an idol, right? So again, we need to spend time in the Word, time in prayer, time with other believers, and be thankful. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, you are so graceful to us, Lord, and we need to be more grateful to you just for the fact that if you're all-powerful, as you are, and you're perfectly wise, and you are, and you've proven your love through us through Jesus' sacrifice to save us, Lord, then there's no reason we can't trust you to give us what's best and right and at the right time, and just be thankful, Lord. You know, anything we have, ultimately we'd trace back to you. You've given us our lives. You've given us our talents and abilities. You've placed us in the time we live in, the place we live, and you've put the people around us, Lord, according to your plans and purposes. And really, we don't bring anything to the table, ultimately, Lord, that what didn't come from you first, Lord. So help us to just trust you. Help us to accept your grace and mercy when we find ourselves, you know, maybe making an idol out of things, Lord. I thank you that it doesn't mean you stop loving us, Lord. You love us all the time. Lord, help us to identify those things we might mistakenly trust in over you. And Lord, you know, again, to spend the time in your word and prayer and around other believers that we could, you know, stay as fruitful in our faith as we can, Lord. And we just know you've been good to us. You're going to keep being good to us, Lord. And I do look forward to the day, one day, when we leave this place and we'll be before you forever, see you face to face, and we'll never struggle again with sin, with idolatry, with even, Lord, with pain and, you know, physical pain and emotional pain, Lord. All those things will be gone forever one day, and we'll be with you. In the meantime, just help us to walk in faith. In Jesus' name.